Ladies and gentlemen, you may have noticed in the news that the Royal Warrants have been announced, and a lot of brands who had a Royal Warrant before were probably a bit nervous as to whether they would get a new one administered to them now that Prince Charles had become King Charles. But one brand could perhaps have a lot more confidence than the others, and that is Purdey, because ever since 1868, Purdey have had Royal Warrants, and ever since 1878, crucially when Queen Victoria appointed hers, they have been Royal Warrant holders for every monarch since Queen Victoria. The wonderful thing about Purdey as a brand is that it kind of holds a lot of the historical breadcrumbs of our history's culture. For example, the dents in the wall here, if you know where to look for them, are the dents from the bombs that the Nazis dropped on London during the Blitz. And inside, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the brand, not only for the craftsmanship that is such a huge part of their output, but crucially the history that they have been able to document in the brand's lifetime, and then also the etiquette that comes with our most idiosyncratic of pastimes, is country sports. When you first walk in, there's all sorts of bric-a-brac. There's all kinds of things that are, I guess, accessories to going on a shooting weekend. So we'll come back to all this as part of the Purdey offering, but we're going to walk through to what's called the long room. And the long room holds an awful lot of history. It's a very special place to be. We'll talk a little bit more about the history of the long room when we're in there, but crucially, one of the things that's notable is that Queen Elizabeth dined here to say goodbye to the old chairman, Richard Beaumont. And in here is, I guess, the central, this ground zero for the history of the brand. The ledgers across here, thousands and thousands of pages of dedication to craftsmanship and a whole host of memories for families who have bought something that will be able to be passed down through the generations and who have dedicated themselves to investing in something that it is at the very, very pinnacle of craftsmanship. When you look at what Purdey actually make and the detail that they go into when producing their guns, and their factory itself is only in Hammersmith, it's not somewhere deep in the countryside, it is in London. So the communication between these two portals are particularly good. But this is where it all starts. If you're going to order something from Purdey, you come here and you begin your journey, sometimes that can last a couple of years, to create something that is fully bespoke for you in a way that just doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. So as I mentioned, during this video, we're going to go through several different chapters, the first of which is going to be looking closely at what it is that they are known for and taking a little bit of a deep dive into the craftsmanship and the history behind the creation of shotguns. So what I have in front of me are two finished guns by Purdey. There is both a over and under and a side by side. These are the two most likely things you're going to be getting. There are variables like hammer guns, etc. But really, these two here are what you need to know about. The side-by-side, as it says, the barrels are side-by-side. So the thing to know about Purdey is that they use what's called the Beazley action, and it's pretty much unique to them in comparison to everyone else. So it's the system that's basically used for cocking the gun. So when you break the gun, when it falls open like this, for most other gun makers, the breaking of it is what cocks the gun. But when the Beazley action is used, it's on the closing is when it cocks it. The justification behind using the Beazley action is pretty much twofold. So for one, it takes a lot more force to break the gun when you don't have the Beazley action. So when it cocks on the opening, that is going to take a little bit more force, and also then comes with a bit of a time restraint as well, so it doesn't do it as fast. So those two factors are why they use the Beasley action over what everybody else uses. And this is the over and under. Now, the over and under comes with an awful lot of controversy. Why? I think people are a little bit snobby about them, and because the side-by-side is the OG, it's the original, it's kind of what the traditionalists use. However, it is pretty much accepted nowadays that you will hit twice as much, but you'll also get half the invitations. The truth is, though, is that nowadays times have slightly moved on. You're less likely to see that level of snobbery. It's really just kind of to be a bit tongue-in-cheek these days. And in terms of Purdey orders, most people come in nowadays looking for an over and under. So what is it that actually gets you to the stage of having a finished gun? It's about 800 to 1,000 hours and 7 stages of gun making. We're going to look at particular one of those stages because really, for me, it really encapsulates how the human hand and eye still play such a critical role in British craftsmanship, and that is barrel making. So this item here kind of looks like I've been on a walking tour of the trenches and come home with a souvenir, but it is called a barrel blank. It's where it all starts from when it comes to making a chopper lump barrel. The chopper lump side of it comes from this end, which has a function to it, and you'll see as it goes on the process why it's referred to as that. But as you note down here, it is a fully solid piece of metal, which ultimately needs to be bored through, so it remains like this on the outside, but obviously completely bored out in the middle. And after an awful lot of handiwork, it turns into this. So as you can see, the central metal has been taken out. It's a much different color. That comes through an awful lot of filing that files the metal down to the correct width that it needs to be. Bearing in mind, this is a bespoke product. So the judgment on how wide and how long the barrels are is entirely done through the gun salesmen here at Purdey, who are able to adjudicate what is needed for the client. Now back to the chopper lump. The reason why it's actually a really important part of the gun making process is ultimately it connects the barrel to the working parts of the gun. The two barrels would be put side to side. So imagine an identical version of this, they're put upside next to each other. And the finished product of the barrel is this. So the chopper lump gets cut down to what it needs to be to connect to the working parts of the gun itself. Now moving further down the process, and now we're talking really into the triple figures in terms of hours of work that's now gone into the gun that you've ordered, you have the barrel attached to the action and the working parts. And so this is a really wonderful demonstration of the intricate metal work and the exact measurements required for creating a gun. And here we have dummy cartridge, promise. And so when you close it up, pull the trigger, you can see the working parts moving together, all hitting the firing pin, which then hits the cartridge, and then of course there is the release. So as much as gun making is a kind of physics and engineering feat, it is also an aesthetic one, because Purdey do produce really beautiful items at the end of the day. And one of the things that really are remarkable to the brand is its engravings. And so here you see this scroll engraving. It's a large scroll engraving, and the engravers themselves, there's very few of them that are able to do it. And it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to complete this engraving. And there's only a few available in terms of engravers who are able to do this kind of level of work. Purdey are extremely picky about who they get to do this, and the finishing is pretty spectacular. You work a bit further down, and you have what's called checkering. It's basically the grip, so it's so you can hold onto it. But in and of itself is a really beautiful piece of craftsmanship, because this is all done by hand with a checkering tool. It literally in a straight line. The butt is attached to a vise. And I've seen it in action with the craftsman just running the tool up and down at this part of the butt, and creates this absolutely exact checkering, which I think is one of the more underappreciated parts of a way that a gun looks so spectacular. Now onto the varnishing. The stock itself is made from a exhibition grade walnut. It's called a slackum finish, this varnishing is what it's called to really bring it to life. And the varnish that they use is proprietary. I believe they call it the red stuff at the factory. And the bottle itself is pretty gross looking. It looks like it's as old as the brand itself, but I don't really mind what the formula is for making it because I just love the results that it creates. Just like with a tailored suit, finishing is everything. It kind of makes or breaks the entire product. Now, the finishing here, where you can see, is impeccable because bearing in mind, the people who work on the trigger guards and the trigger plates and the stocks, they all play on their own separate benches, and they craft based on the measurements that's provided from here, and then it all needs to come together at one point and fit exactly. The metal work side of it is the one that will need adjusting if it has to be, but ultimately the results will be impeccable, no gaps, and just sitting completely flush. So now we've had a sort of snapshot, because bearing in mind 100 hours is very hard to distill down into a couple of minutes, of the craftsmanship of the creation of a Purdey gun. But we're now going to look a little bit at the history. So we're going to dig into the ledgers to find a little entry that I think would both amuse and interest you. So Purdey is one of those kind of places where if you pull out a random ledger and open up a random page, you may just get His Majesty King George V as the entry, and this is that entry with a whole host of orders, both for shooting in the countryside and also an order for a rifle for when he went to India. Now, George V was a prolific shot and stamp collector as well. He was the most marvellously benign of constitutional monarchs. There's a great order here for HRH Prince Albert in 1914, who would of course go on to be King George VI and father of Queen Elizabeth II. Now, in this ledger here next door, there's a really nice inscription. As I say, he was a prolific shot, and it says here in 1936, His Majesty the King died at Sandringham House at 11:55 p.m. Monday, January the 20th, 1936. The kindest and best customer we ever had, Tom Purdey. And then just below it, there's another one that says, His Majesty King Edward VIII abdicated from the throne on December 1936 in favour of his brother, His Royal Highness the Duke of York, who became King George VI. Long live the King, Tom Purdey. So when I say that Purdey is full of the historical breadcrumbs that have made the culture and history of our island nation, I really do mean it. But back to George V, there is something I want to show you, which is that in 1935 he celebrated his Silver Jubilee. And very graciously, Purdey made him a pair of guns in celebration of that anniversary. And they also kept a third version for themselves here, which was the kind of prototype for what they made him. And the reason why they needed to do that was this is the pair of guns that they made him. This is a perfect miniaturized gun, fully working, with the working parts and all inside. It does fire. There seems to be only one cartridge left in this particular briefcase. If you were to remake them, it would cost hundreds of thousands of pounds just for the ammunition. It has been said that George V used these to shoot moths at Sandringham, and I really hope that's true, and let's just go with the fact that it is true. But as I say, this is a genuinely remarkable engineering feat to do something like this. Imagine creating a fully driving Ferrari that is, you know, the size of the palm of your hand. There is no difference between creating this and creating a miniaturized Ferrari the size of your hand. And Purdey have been able to do that, and they were able to do that in 1935. So, I mean, if we're looking at the historical prowess of craftsmanship across the entire world, something like this just shows that Britain has been miles ahead for a very, very long time. Now onto etiquette. It is very true that shooting is an age-old pastime. However, whilst times have moved on and of course things have relaxed somewhat, there are still some rules you absolutely need to know before you go on a weekend shooting. Number 1, tip the head gamekeeper. Think of an estate a little bit like a platoon in the army where you have the squire, who is the lieutenant, but the head gamekeeper is the sergeant. He really runs the show. So you have the head gamekeeper who will be floating around. You will spot them during the day. Make sure you introduce yourself to them and get to know them, because they have put in an awful lot of effort to make sure you have an amazing day. And at the very end, every single one of his team and the picker-uppers, they all go out for a drink and you need to be buying the rounds. Number 2, make sure you arrive with a gift and you leave with a thank you note for your hostess. And we're not talking about emails here, we're talking about handwritten notes in the old-fashioned snail mail style. Number 3, be on time at the front, ready to get into the cars. You usually will leave around 9 o'clock to start the day's shooting. The night before, it is likely there was some frivolity. It doesn't matter how hairy it got, you need to be outside on time. Number 4, when you take the peg, don't shoot the bird that goes over the peg next to you. You will notice that the birds come over in certain channels, and if you start shooting across and you're taking other people's birds, you're not going to have the best time with everybody else. There is actually one exception. It's called wiping somebody's eye. If they've tried and failed on both shots, you can have a go. Number 5, pick up your cases afterwards. Bear in mind, these are working farms you're on, so there's a couple of reasons why you don't want to be leaving your cartridges on the floor. Firstly, they're not biodegradable. They won't just disappear. So the tractors and animals that will end up grazing or working those particular fields don't want mouthfuls or machinefuls of your metal and plastic cases. Number 6, don't go for low birds. The reason they call it country sports is it is meant to be sporting. So you shoot higher birds, because if you go for too low and you get them, it ruins the spirit of the day. Number 7, and this is incredibly important, always remember safety. These are lethal weapons, and every time a drive finishes, you will need to be seen by everybody else, basically, to be breaking the gun and unloading it and then packing it away in a gun case. Once it's in the gun case, then everybody's safe and happy, but make sure that is the first thing you do, even before you pick up your cartridges. Number 8 is listen to the rules that are given to you before you drive off. There's going to be a couple of them, which is what you are not allowed to shoot. So if you are not allowed to shoot woodcock and they specify it, don't shoot one if you see it. They will not mention something called a white pheasant. This is meant to be something you have just known you are not allowed to shoot at. The white pheasant are much rarer. You do not shoot them, and if you do, you will get fined. So number 9 is all about gun dogs. If you have a gun dog, you have to make sure that it properly behaves. This starts from the moment you get out of the cars and walk towards your peg, because depending on where you are, you may walk past the area where the birds are, and if the dogs aren't trained enough, they may run in there and disturb the drive, in fact ruin it from the off. But they also need to make sure that they don't put themselves in danger when things start firing and there's a lot of noise. They need to be able to be calm and appropriately behaved on the peg. And number 10 is dress appropriately, and I'll show you how to do that now. So, what to wear on the peg? There is an awful lot of debate when it comes to clothing you should be wearing at shooting. There is a little bit like with the over and under and the side-by-side debate, a slight snobbery when it comes to the idea of having new clothes when you go to the peg, because the older families tend to like to let everything kind of disintegrate and get moth-bitten, because it kind of shows that they are old hands when it comes to shooting. But I think that one should look the part much more than be the part. That's always been my motto. So the central part of shooting clothes is the breeks. Obviously that's the thing that distinguishes it from any other sporting or casual or formal occasion. You know it's shooting attire because of the breeks and the socks. Now, breeks as a item of clothing, a lot of people refer to them as +2s or +4s. It's actually neither. +4s are when the fabric folds over 4 inches across the place where it stops at the knee, plus 2s are 2, whereas breeks just stop at the knee. It actually doesn't really have any fold over whatsoever. You may, however, see gamekeepers distinguishing themselves as gamekeepers by wearing things like +4s and +2. So you'll see that there's a lot of overhang, and you'll be able to spot them a mile away. So these are a pair of breeks. As you can see, this is where it stops at the knee. Otherwise, they are a fairly normal looking pair of trousers. They should be tweed and this kind of colour, because what that does is it means that you blend into the countryside on which you're shooting. So when the birds go over, they don't immediately spot you, you don't stand out. And also the thing about tweed is that it's waterproof, and in this country we are not blessed with endless sun during the shooting season. And just to remind you, the shooting season is from the 12th of August. You have what's referred to as the glorious 12th, and the glorious 12th is when grouse season starts. And then at the beginning of September, you start shooting partridge. At the beginning of October, you can start shooting pheasant, and then it all wraps up at the end of January. Now, breeks should be worn with long shooting socks. These are often thicker. Purdey have a great selection of ones that are made either from cashmere, merino wool, all sorts, that go right up to the knee, roll over, and crucially, another signature of shooting are the garters that stick out the side of the socks. These are specifically for holding your socks up. However, of course, modern day socks, they are able to stay up, it's no problem. So they play a practical role. However, they really are there as a sort of or part of the costume or the uniform of a day shooting. So that covers the trousers. And for me, if I were to offer any advice, I would say that you need to keep constant wherever it is you're going, whoever it is you're shooting with, always have your breeks and your long socks, and the rest of it you can kind of play with a little bit. This, for example, this is a Norfolk jacket. It's called a Norfolk jacket. You can identify a Norfolk jacket through these straps that go vertically down the jacket. Now, the purpose of those initially was so you can have some pockets, and these kind of disguise the pockets. So you can slip your hand under here. They will lead down some wonderful what's called bellows pockets. You could identify bellows pockets by the fact that they don't sit flush to the jacket. They protrude out a little bit to allow for a little bit more capacity inside the pocket itself. It does up at the top, so it's called a storm collar. So it does up all the way to top, and of course it has the belt, which is the sort of signature of the Norfolk jacket. This particular one is made in a cashmere tweed, which is unusual to, I've never seen anything like it up until this point. Weirdly enough, I'm now starting to see other people do it. So it's clearly catching on as an idea. It means that it's tweed, which is a weave. Remember, tweed is not necessarily just a fabric, it's a weave. So this is cashmere done just like that. Just as I have a cashmere jersey jacket at home, it's just all about how things are woven. And so this is cashmere woven in tweed, and it's beautiful. So underneath the jacket, I would say that you should always be wearing a shirt and tie. That would be another one of my rules. There's not everybody follows that. Even as I say, there's a lot of people who I know have been shooting for decades who don't necessarily. They wear a lot more kind of roll necks and so on. But I quite like the small amounts of formality that can still be added to a shooting outfit. So when you have a country shirt like this, remember not to get sort of a floppy or button down collar, have something that can hold a tie nicely. This is a shooting vest. So as the season drifts all the way from August through to the end of January, there is a multitude of different types of weather that you can experience. Because it's Britain, I will predict it's largely going to rain and be windy and wet. However, sometimes you'll get lucky. And having a vest like this is a great thing to have, because you can wear it when it's much cooler. I often wear it even when it's cold, when the rain isn't coming out. I take off the field jacket so I can have a little bit more room for manoeuvre. It's a bit more comfortable, and so they also add these bellows pockets to make sure that it's accessible to things like cartridges, because I think a lot of people do exactly just as I do. Now, an absolutely key item is what's called the field coat. So this is, or this should go over, whether it's a jacket, a waistcoat, shirt, the whole lot. This should be what's on top. Purdey, just like a lot of brands at the moment, have been really trying to accelerate their kind of technical wear, so their ability to keep things looking traditional, but at the same time apply all the technology with regards to fabrics that allow it to be very waterproof, insulate well, and keep you very comfortable while you're outdoors. The normal little details, for example, these bellows pockets, which what will happen in the hand warming pocket here, there will be this little tab that will attach to the field jackets. It means that the pocket will stay open so you can easily access them when the drive is running. On this side as well, you have what's called a sports back. So the little pleat here, that means that there's a bit more maneuverability when you move around. It's subtly hidden in to it, so it still looks like quite a formal garment, especially with the tweed. This is the Berkshire. And the patterning as well kind of looks like the kind of thing you would have tailored as a kind of country suit, and this would go on top of that. Now the extremities. So one thing you should always have when you're shooting is a hat, a flat cap like this. But then again, if you want to be a little bit more adventurous, I saw a rather dashing American once sport a deerstalker, which I thought was terrific. Days of the Homburg, I'm afraid, sadly, are over. But if you want to be super old-fashioned, go for that. Now for the feet, Wellington boots are absolutely just the kind of go-to for anybody who wants to go shooting, but then also needs things that work outside of that too. Purdey do have these strap boots, and the thing about these is that when you look at original images of people shooting, this is the kind of thing that they wore. So this is very much the traditional shooting footwear. Ultimately, you're trudging through a lot of mud and wet grass, fields, all sorts of things are going to get on your boots. So you want to make sure you have something that you don't mind getting dirty. But hot tip, always have a spare pair of shoes with you in the car. So when you go for lunch and stuff, you've got something to change into. And the only accessory you'll need, other than the gun itself, is a cartridge bag. And so speak to the estate owner before to make sure that you have the correct cartridges inside. So whether that's steel, lead, well, actually lead's being phased out, so you need to know whether it's going to be acceptable in those estates at all, because some have completely banned it and gone straight for steel. And also something called bismuth, which is much more acceptable for things like duck, because you don't want to poison the water. So speak to your estate owners to make sure that you bring the correct cartridges to go into here, but this is all you'll need for a full day shooting. And finally, a little bit frivolous, but I highly recommend one because it's very useful for getting through the fields, is one of these walking sticks. Now, this particular one I can see is hazel, and the story goes that the person who actually makes these goes out into the field and seems to have some sort of spiritual connection with sticks that he finds and creates these sticks by hand, all for Purdey, and as an investment, it's one of the ones that I know will see me to old age at home. So I love my, it's actually a thumbstick that I have, which I use for going shooting, and so keep an eye out for this one in shot 2. That most people who... That's all right, pal, just take your time. You're very kind. I'm delighted. I fell.